All right, and welcome back, everybody. Today we are talking about the ladies of the late 1800s, early 1900s, that is, during this progressive era, which has been known as the era of the woman, the decades from 1890 to like 1920, in the lead up to the very, very important, my favorite, the 19th Amendment. You'll never guess what the 19th Amendment does. You probably did. It gives women the right to vote. So we're going to talk about that a little bit, but we're also going to be talking about that a lot more with the World War One unit when that actually going to get widespread appeal from a lot of men. But sexism has always been very alive in America and in history in general. And that is no different for this time period we're talking about when women are seeing big changes happen. You're starting to see a huge rise in visibility of women out in public. You're seeing women for the first time in large numbers actually working in jobs outside of the house. You're seeing lots of women as consumers, shopping in stores, out in public. You're seeing women in places of entertainment like cinemas, theaters, vaudevilles, and dance halls, not just as the performers, revoking, sexual objectification, but as people enjoying these shows, going to the entertainment and hearing a comedy act or seeing an animal act or, all the stuff they had at the vaudevilles and the Nickelodeons and stuff. And so women are challenging traditional gender norms even before we get to the era of the flappers and stuff that we'll see in the 1920s. Women are starting to be more of a public presence. You can't just shove them in the house anymore, guys. Remember in the 1800s, this idea of the cult of domesticity was really big, that a woman's place, a woman's sphere of influence was that domestic, in other words, the house. Her job was to raise the family. If the man of the house, and this was his role, so talking about gender roles for men, was to provide for the family, to be the breadwinner, to go outside the house and work, and then come back to the sphere that the woman had set up that was safe, where she provided the food, the dinner, took care of the children, cleaned the house, all of those things. So women are pushing these boundaries by being out in public doing all these new things. And as the Triangle Shirtwaist Factory fire in 1911 revealed, more and more women were working for wages. Immigrant women were largely confined to, of course, the low-paying factory jobs, like we saw them in the Triangle Shirtwaist Factory. But for native-born white women, the kinds of jobs available were expanding enormously. Like by 1920, around a quarter of the employed women in the United States were office workers, secretaries, or telephone operators. A switchboard operator, you had to originally like connect a phone call with a cord and stuff. It was mostly women who would be working those jobs. It gave these women, just like we talked about a long time ago at the beginning of the market revolution, beginning of the 1800s. This is the end of the 1800s now, early 1900s. Remember the Low Girls? At the beginning of all this, it's the same idea. It gave these women a chance to be free, a chance to do something different outside of the house, outside of what was expected for them. They would get a chance to be independent, to work for their own wages, like we talked about for the newly freed slaves after the Civil War. Remember where we started this 1302 class off, what many of them agreed equaled freedom in their mind was to own land and to be in control of their own labor. It's the same thing for women, to be in control of their own work, to be able to provide for themselves. That is freedom. And you have at this time period a very, very prolific feminist social critic and novelist, Charlotte Perkins Gilman's. Charlotte Perkins Gilman wrote Women and Economics, and she's going to influence the new generation of women aspiring to greater autonomy and freedom. She insisted that how people earned a living shaped their entire lives, and that therefore women must free themselves from the home to achieve genuine freedom. Women are going to be able to gain more rights and a voice for themselves, maybe suffrage, and able to enact many of the social reforms that they've been focused on since the mid 1800s, if they're able to get outside the house and work more, in other words, get more of a prominent role in our society. It makes sense. During this woman's era, don't forget the importance of the temperance movement. Remember, temperance means that from the reform movements from the Second Great Awakening, we want to limit people's alcoholic consumption. And one of the biggest women's groups that was trying to not only limit alcohol, but prohibit it altogether, and forcefully working towards a constitutional amendment to ban alcohol, which will eventually become the 18th Amendment. It doesn't get ratified until 1919. But one of the biggest groups that was trying to prohibit alcohol in America was the WCTU, the Women's Christian Temperance Union, led by Frances Willard. It was founded in 1874, and by 1890, it had over 150,000 members worldwide. It was definitely the largest of the women's groups. And they called themselves a home protection group. You could see their sign there, and some of the faces. I often make fun of this, citing the very strange afflicted accent that they had back then. Accents have changed in America over time, but lips that touch liquor shall not touch ours. But their point there is understood easily, right? That they believed alcohol was sinful, not just morally, as Christians, but also in the house. Alcohol was leading to a lot of domestic violence and domestic abuse against wives. And against children from alcoholic fathers and husbands. And in order to stop that, we needed a ban on alcohol. And as the group grew, Frances Willard is also going to become more and more active in the suffrage movement. And the suffrage movement at this time is becoming a mass movement, not only to get suffrage state by state, which they will be doing and achieving, but eventually in the early 1900s, it really becomes a mass movement to seek a constitutional amendment for women to get the right to vote. And that is why the 18th Amendment, prohibition of alcohol, which passes in 1919, and the 19th Amendment, granting women the right to vote, women's suffrage, they are tied hand in hand. They go together, right? Because as women wanted to do things like make alcohol illegal, they increasingly saw that their efforts were stymied unless they could have a political voice, because politicians aren't going to listen to women unless women can help keep those politicians in office. That's what politicians ultimately care about, right? Is being able to maintain political power to stay in office. And so no vote, they don't care. Women needed that right to vote to do the things they were trying to achieve here. Alrighty, let's switch gears. The word feminism is really going to enter the political vocabulary at this time in the progressive era in the early 1900s. In 1914, a mass meeting at New York's Cooper Union debated the question, what is feminism? What does this word mean? And one speaker answering this said that feminism meant freeing women both as human beings and as sexual beings. And it's a delicate topic to discuss, especially as a dual credit teacher teaching a lot of teenagers, boys and girls. But sexual revolution is something that is going to be a real thing in America. And it wasn't just in the civil rights era in the 1960s and 70s and 1980s and today that we're talking about the sexual revolution, but it started really during this progressive era. The growing presence of women in the labor market, working women, it reinforced the demands for access to what Margaret Sanger will call birth control, or control over when a woman can reproduce, when she has a baby. That was not in control of women before. Women had no control over when they were going to have a baby before this progressive time period. Comstock law and other state laws passed throughout the United States in the late 1800s for religious reasons and everything else. They're going to limit access to birth control. They're going to limit access, in other words, to contraceptives. They don't yet have like the modern condom or anything, but there were other means of contraception that became banned. And even banning sexual positions and other things. And it's like, how do you enforce these things? Well, they basically limit, the sale of this. They make these items illegal. They make also, most importantly, information about contraception, ways for a woman to make sure she doesn't become pregnant with child. They make information about that illegal, and inaccessible. Um, that's censorship, right? Taking away information. And so that's what we're talking about here, with the birth control movement. And there are two really important figures, Margaret Sanger probably being the most important, but also Emma Goldman, that you really need to know about. And they're trying to change the way a woman was viewed at this time. Remember, a woman, her place is in the home. Y'all understand that idea. But also, she was not supposed to enjoy the act. She was not supposed to partake of, entertainment that was sexual. She was not supposed to enjoy those things. She was not supposed to have freedom over, a lot of stuff. There's romantic notions, and it was okay for a woman to, try to find a suitable husband and stuff. But ultimately, it was always the man's choice. Um, you know, when they would marry, how many kids they would have, if she would have children. If the woman was working and she becomes pregnant, then her working career was over. That was it. She was then going to be relegated to the role of mother, whether she liked it or not. So that this was a really big deal for women's freedom. That's what I mean by the sexual revolution. If a woman can become in control of deciding when she becomes pregnant, when she has children, she basically has freedom. If she doesn't, you can read this quote from Margaret Sanger herself. It says, "No woman can call herself free who does not own and control her own body. No woman can call herself free until she can choose consciously whether she will or will not become a mother." All right, so that's what we're talking about here. Emma Goldman was an immigrant to the United States from the Eastern European country of Lithuania. It's very near Russia. She came over at the age of 16 and toured the United States and Canada, lecturing on subjects from anarchism, which is, let's overthrow the government, labor rights, to the need to have a more enlightened attitudes towards homosexuals, gay people. She regularly included the right to birth control in her speeches and actually distributed informational pamphlets with detailed discussion about various contraceptive devices to people in the audiences of where she would speak. So she was a big labor leader, but also was saying that for these working class women, birth control was a means for them to achieve freedom. That was Emma Goldman. She's mostly known for her anarchist tensions and other things she causes, but she was a big supporter of women's rights and the birth control movement. Margaret Sanger was one of 11 children. Yes, you heard that correctly. She was born to an enormously large Irish working class family in New York City. And she constantly saw, after every birth her mother gave of all of her siblings, how the toll that this took on her mother's health, and her mother's ability to live her life was so limited by having all of these children, and there was nothing that her mother could do to stop having these children until her mother finally died. This was the fate of many poor working women, that they continued to try to take care of their families, tried to put food on the table, and tried to have all these children and care for all of them. And it just literally exhausted their bodies and their health until they died. They didn't have a long life expectancy. And so that's directly why Margaret Sanger, that's why she's going to become basically the mother of the birth control movement. There she is right there. In 1911, Margaret Sanger began a column on sex education. It was called "What Every Girl Should Know" for The Call, a New York socialist newspaper. Postal officials, they barred one issue containing a column on venereal diseases, sexually transmitted diseases, from the mail. So the next issue of the Call that Sanger sent out included a blank page with the headline, "What Every Girl Should Know," and then it had nothing. by order of the U.S. Post Office. So she's not afraid to get in it with the government and to fight for this. She believed very strongly that this was the key to basically liberating women, allowing them to have control of their reproductive facilities. By 1914, Sanger was openly advertising birth control in defiance of anti-contraceptive laws. In her own journal, The Woman Rebel, she said, "No woman can call herself free who does not own and control her own body and can choose consciously whether she will or will not become a mother." There you go. That's that quote. In 1916, Sanger opened a clinic in a working class immigrant neighborhood of Brooklyn and began distributing contraceptive devices to poor Jewish and Italian women, an action for which she was put in jail multiple times. And Margaret Sanger will go on to become the founder of the Planned Parenthood organization that is very controversial today because, again, right-wing and conservative outlets, they see it as a free abortion clinic, which is not what it is. Planned Parenthood is a place for women who cannot afford women's health care to receive services like breast care screening. If they do need an abortion, it does provide those services, but after the Roe v. Wade case, that's only after that's only before, excuse me, the first trimester. It also does a lot of other sorts of cancer screenings, cervical cancer screenings, and all sorts of women's health, and including helping pregnant women, deliver successfully and things like that. But this is so important for women to understand. When you have a baby, it's a beautiful, magical thing. It's something, I think almost all of us probably eventually, maybe not you guys right now, but eventually it's something that you're going to want to have a family, a legacy, children to pass off what you've learned to. That's a beautiful, wonderful, natural thing. But for a woman, as much as we might want to be mothers, we also have to understand that when you have a child, your whole entire life becomes about that kid. And you no longer live for yourself, you are living for them. And that's a huge transition that many people would not be prepared for, much less young women who are coming from a disadvantaged life. And so having birth control, Margaret Sanger, she lives into the 60s, just long enough to see the creation of the birth control pill. Being able to have access to a reliable method to control when you are ready to have a child, that is one of the big keys for women to have freedom. All right. Jane Addams is kind of America's first social worker. She's an incredible progressive reformist and a woman who did so much to help immigrants in the cities. She basically is the founder of the Hull Houses. And so she was born in 1860. She's the daughter of an Illinois businessman. And in 1889, she founded the first Hull House. It's a settlement house. That's usually what they're called in Chicago. And the settlement houses, the Hull Houses, they're devoted to improving the lives of the immigrant poor, the urban poor. Unlike previous reformists who had aided the poor from a distance by donations to charities and whatnot, the settlement houses get right in there. These were where workers actually moved into the poor neighborhoods. They built kindergartens, they built playgrounds for children, they established employment bureaus and health clinics, and showed female victims of domestic abuse how to gain legal protections. These are all just some of the services that the Hull Houses provided. These settlement houses, they also had education programs. They taught English classes to immigrants. They gave them all the tools necessary to try to get a life, not just a survival in the United States, but an actual to be able to make a life here for themselves. And by 1910, there were more than 400 settlement houses established in cities throughout the country. So they started in Chicago and spread all over. So Jane Addams, like Addams Family Addams, that's how it's spelled, right? Dun 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 dun. Da 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 da. That's how it's spelled. No relation to the actual Adams family. Adams. She was this rich woman who's basically going to donate most of her life, her time, and her family's money to helping poor immigrants in the cities. She becomes the founder of the profession of social work. And you see social workers. There's schools for them today. I know a lot of my friends who I graduated from high school with at La Vega. A lot of them went on to Mary Hardin Baylor and got degrees in social work. And I've seen them around town, at the Y and around neighborhoods and stuff here in Waco, trying to help a lot of kids who are disadvantaged, who have no place to live, who have not enough food or clothing, who are victims of abuse. This is what social workers do. If you're interested in being someone who basically devotes their life to helping others, that is a very noble profession to go into. So that's from Jane Addams. All right, let's see. So suffrage means the right to vote. Membership in the very old National American Women's Suffrage Association that had been founded right after the Civil War by women suffragettes such as the OG, Elizabeth Cady Stanton, who had written the Declaration of Sentiments back at Seneca Falls in 1848. And her right hand conspirator, Susan B. Anthony. That suffrage association, it only had 13,000 members in 1893. But again, this is becoming a mass movement across the nation to get a constitutional amendment to secure the right to vote for women. Over half the population is women. And so by 1917, the membership in the NAWSA, NASA, the National American Women's Suffrage Association, was up to 2 million. And by 1900, more than half of the United States allowed women to vote in local elections, dealing with issues like, school board and other local matters. And you also had several Western states, including the first one being Wyoming, which allowed and adopted full suffrage for women. So women could vote in the not only local, but also state and national elections in those Western states. Now, it's mostly Western states that first allowed women to vote during this time period because there were less women out in the West. And women out in the West usually had pretty harsh lifestyles, and they wanted to kind of use suffrage as a way to attract more women out West. Between 1910 and 1914, right before World War I, you're going to have 7 more Western states, in addition to Wyoming, Colorado, Idaho, and Utah, also enfranchise or give the right to vote to women. And in 1913, Illinois became the first state that was east of the Mississippi River to also allow women the right to vote. So before the 19th Amendment, which is going to ratify in 1920, there were some states that allowed women the right to vote. Texas, I think, was one of them. But the 19th Amendment is going to guarantee the right to vote for women everywhere in the country because, a constitutional amendment affects the entire country. There's also an important Supreme Court case that you need to be aware of. This is from 1908, the landmark Supreme Court case of Mueller versus Oregon. You have the lawyer and future Supreme Court Justice Louis D. Brandeis. He filed a famous brief citing scientific and sociological studies to demonstrate that because they had less strength and endurance than men, long hours of labor were dangerous for women. Our poor, frail bodies just couldn't take it. While their unique ability, he said, to bear children, I'm sorry, if you're strong enough to have a child, you're strong enough to do anything. Excuse me, but I've seen the stuff they have on social media and YouTube and stuff today where they have electroshocked, and they've tried to mimic the pain of child labor and giving birth for a man to show the pain that a woman is in and how arduous and how difficult it is to give birth. And if you can handle that, you're a tough person. You can handle a normal working day. This is total sexism right here, which is discrimination against women. Well, sexism can also be discrimination against men. That does exist, but in this case, it's discrimination against women. Misogyny. All right. While their unique ability to bear children gave the government a legitimate interest in their working conditions. So the government was very interested in protecting women because we can get the babies. So the Supreme Court were so persuaded by Brandeis's argument that women were too frail to work longer than 8 hours, they're actually going to unanimously uphold the constitutionality of an Oregon law that set a maximum working amount of hours for women each week. I think 40 hours probably. And there's going to be many other states by 1917, 30 other states are also going to enact limits on the hours of labor for female workers. So at a time when you had increasing numbers of women actually going to school, graduating from college, entering the workforce, still not huge numbers, but an increasing number of poor women in factory jobs and middle-class white women working in those white-collar office jobs like, phone operators and secretaries. You have this law come out, Mueller versus Oregon, which on the surface sounds good, sounds like we're protecting women, not having them, putting hours limits for how much they can work each week, but actually that is taking away some freedom. That is going to be denying women work. So that was a pretty bad Supreme Court case, and again reflecting kind of the sexism of the time period. All right, so we're still going to be talking about the actual ratification of the 19th Amendment. We're not there yet, but we're getting real close. World War I is going to be the time period when we get the last big push that will make that possible. So thank you guys for listening, and as usual, I will be talking to you later. Thank you guys. Bye.